I guess with the paradigms and your background, whatever it is, I was wrong. I judged you at first. I was like, who is this guy? And then like you just, it was a home run, dude. So I respect that.
Thank you.
I mean, Flint, what do you make of these figures? What sort of ethnic group would you think they belong to?
I don't identify ethnic groups like that, man. Like,
Yeah, man, we're rolling now. This is episode 9 of the David Ian Howe Show. I have ethnocynology and the David Ian Howe Show. Ethnocynology is, dogs and science. This one is just interviewing people I find interesting. And you are someone I find extremely interesting. And I knew of your father, then I heard of you. And then
like a lot of people, but not all.
Yeah. And then everyone was like, dude, did you hear this guy's doing Joe Rogan debating Hancock? And here we are talking now. After all that, you've been on a million things. So how you doing today, Flint?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Just had a busy day. I'm trying to get up for teaching, which starts next week. And the computer the university got me just wasn't working. So,
Oh, yeah?
it was a fun day where I couldn't do anything with the computer. And my computer's like 4 years old. So like, my computer's just, I need to get a new one.
Not terribly old, but still, yeah.
Yeah, it's up there.
Right. And you're at Cardiff now, Wales?
Yeah, Cardiff University. I just finished what's called a Marie Curie Fellowship. So that was like a
Okay.
small grant from the European Union to study animal remains from the island of Crete in Greece. And so that just finished up, in August. And I just started a new contract. I'm teaching for Cardiff for the next year, a few different classes. I'm teaching archaeology theory and I'm teaching zooarchaeology. The zooarchaeology is at the master's level, and then the archaeological theories at the undergrad level. And then I'm lecturing on a number of other modules that other instructors are convening.
Okay. And are you a professor? Are you a lecturer? Are you what exactly?
No, I think the role's just called teacher. Even it's a shitty little job. I'm not gonna lie.
That's fine though.
It's half time. It's sort of like a visiting assistant professor post. I don't know how familiar you are with me in my last year, but I had my cancer recur. I had melanoma.
Yeah, I heard about that.
And literally the day after Graham and I agreed to do the conversation on Joe Rogan, I got the call from my oncologist saying my cancer had returned to my lymph nodes. So I was on chemo for a year, and I had surgery. They sliced me from my elbow down to my nipple, basically, to remove all my lymph nodes over there. And I actually just last week got back the results from a CT scan, so I'm clean right now and
cancer-free.
Feeling good. Yeah, and chemo-free for the last 6 months. But because of that stuff, I'm reticent to go on like a lot of academics before you find your like full professorship type job, you end up just traveling from university to university to university to university for a year or 2 or 3. And I've done that a lot. I had a 3-year postdoc in Athens. I had a 1-year teaching job for Dartmouth College. And then I had my Marie Curie, which was 2, but because of sick leave, it turned into 3 years. And I'm just tired of being a nomad. I've been a nomad for pretty much 15 years.
Yeah.
I've lived in different continents, different countries, doing archaeology in different places. And with the cancer thing, it sort of made me wake up and say, look, I'm tired of that kind of lifestyle. And so because of the success of the conversation with Graham, I'm trying to get my YouTube going. I'm trying to write a book on Atlantis, and I have a literary agent who's trying to sell it right now.
Good.
And then I'm doing my teaching half-time, and I will apply for tenure track positions, but I'm off the non-tenure track gig for right now, at least until I either want to or feel like I have to.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. And while I know my health is doing okay, because I don't want to. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's most important, obviously, over everything.
Yeah. And while I'm in Cardiff, I'm from the US, and fucking, I don't know if I can swear on your show or not, but I'm going to edit it. You can bleep it all you want, but fucking privatized healthcare sucks.
Yep.
Dealing with the first round of melanoma when I was on Ivy League healthcare, it was expensive as hell to pay for the surgeries, even with high quality healthcare. And I mean, I have to say, being in a country with public healthcare and benefits like that, it's amazing. I don't know why
that much of a difference, huh?
Yeah. Oh God. I mean, same quality of care, and I was getting it at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital, in the States, getting it here at the Cancer Center in Cardiff, and very high quality care in both places. For certain things, waiting is a little longer here, but it's about the same kind of wait time for pretty much everything. And it still takes a long time to wait in the States. So, I am full on board with public health care. I think it's the way to go.
That's awesome, dude. I've had my run-ins with dealing with insurance and having to pay way more than they say you have to. And I've been very curious to know how it would work if we switch to that. So
we should.
Glad to know it works better.
That's so much better.
Yeah.
Night and day.
I remember yelling at a lady on the phone and being like, I'm voting for Bernie. Because it was just like, I was so mad.
Look, you go in and you do whatever you need to do at the doctor's. You don't even get a bill. There's no such thing as a bill. There's no money involved. It's just boom. And they take it out of your paycheck like taxes are really easy too. You don't have to go through and calculate all this bullshit that you then send to the IRS. They just take it directly out of your paycheck and it's done. There's nothing else to it. And it's less than we pay in the States for our taxes plus insurance and all the extra costs. It's a lot less. It's just absurd that in America we think that privatized healthcare is better. It ruins people's lives. You know?
I've seen it firsthand, man. I'm glad you shared
too.
that. I was going to ask, what is a postdoc for those listening? But I wanted to add too, I think something that people don't understand about archaeology, especially CRM, but also academic, is just how much you have to move and travel. And if you have a family, uproot your family, constantly move and stuff. So did you go to school in Europe for your PhD or your postdoc or?
No, so I did my undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania in Philly, and I'm from Philly, so that was convenient. Though I didn't live at home when I did it. I lived in West Philly. I had a small apartment, but with friends. But then I went to the University of Cincinnati in Ohio for my PhD, for my master's and my PhD.
Okay.
And while I was there, the classics department at the University of Cincinnati, it's a really large classical archaeology department in the U.S. because it was founded by William Semple, who's not famous to ordinary people, but maybe you'll recognize the last name of his wife, an archaeologist, Louise Semple Taft. Her father was the President Howard Taft, and the Taft family endowed the Department of Classics at the University of Cincinnati for like a whole lot of money. And so they actually have a really strong classical archaeology department, one of the top in the world. And they have excavations. They had excavations when I was there at Pompeii. I don't think they have anyone digging at Pompeii now, but at Knossos and other areas all over the Mediterranean. I mean, like really famous sites and stuff like that. And so I was working there, and they were the ones who got me interested in things like animal remains in ancient Greece. And so they have close connections with what's called the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. It's a large nonprofit based in Athens, and all these American universities are members of it in a sense. And so I went there as a student, and I actually spent 3 years there as a student doing my PhD research and traveling around Greece because they have these programs to travel around Greece. And then I went back there to the archaeological science lab. I had a 3-year postdoc. So I've lived in Greece for like 7 years.
Wow.
Doing research and stuff like that. But my degrees were all from the U.S. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy living in Greece?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, we miss it. My
Greece.
wife is from Albania, so right north of Greece, and so that's our area of the world. I've been working in Greece every summer since 2007. I think was my first time there. Yeah, 2007. And so yeah, I love it there. I love the people. I love the food. I love the music. I love the language. I love the archaeology. I mean, that area of the world is very much home for me, though. I imagine that's also how I got my fucking melanoma. So, it's very sunny there, which I like normally. But yeah, I'm now at risk for that crap. So I have to be a little more careful with what I wear. And I mean, I always use sunscreen because I burn like a lobster, but
Sure. Yeah. Another thing archaeologists need to also take note of is just how much sunscreen and bug spray you have to wear all the time.
Yes. There's a lot of mosquitoes in different areas of Greece too that you have to deal with, which suck. And yeah.
Do you speak much Greek?
Yeah, yeah, I speak some Greek. You have to. I mean, especially if you're working in little villages and stuff like that. You're working with people who don't speak a ton of English, and you're living among them. So it's important. I highly encourage anyone who works in foreign countries. You really need to put in an effort to learn some of the language. I mean, a little goes a long way too, because people speak bits of English, even the ones that aren't fluent. And so it's about communicating and developing a rapport and having respect for local communities. So I think it's very important to learn those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And is a lot of the a lot of the literature on Greek stuff, is that still in German, or is that mainly only pertain to classics, like with German or Greek stuff?
Yeah, so that's actually more of the old school stuff. So like in
Okay.
the 19th century and the early 20th century, German scholars really dominated the field of classics and classical archaeology. Some of the earliest excavations on the Athenian Acropolis were done by Greeks and Germans. So Wilhelm Dorpfeld, right?
Hmm.
And Heinrich Schliemann lived in Athens, and he excavated at Mycenae as well as at Troy. And so, the Germans were very, very prominent. But after World War II, they've become less prominent, if you see what I mean, for various reasons. They still are. I mean, especially, with the
Yeah.
growth and economic powerhouse of modern Germany.
Mhm.
There's a lot of good research done by German scholars. And so, it is still a requirement in most classics departments to get a PhD. You need to be able to read German. So I had to pass, a reading comprehension test in German. I can read enough German to follow most scholarly articles and stuff like that. But
Goot.
it isn't the same kind of need that it used to be. I have a feeling that requirement will go away. I
Mhm.
actually wish that classics departments would require students to learn Greek and Italian, or the language of wherever the hell the students are
Makes more
working.
sense.
Far more valuable, far more literature these days in archaeology is in Greek than in German, if you're talking about Greek archaeology. And so it's much, much more useful. And you're actually then engaging with local scholars, which is even more important and valuable to move the field forward, right?
Right. Because I was really curious of doing classical, like Mediterranean archaeology when I first got in. And I was told, like, well, you're going to have to learn German. And I was like, all right, whatever. I'll do stone tools.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I had to learn I already knew French, but I had to learn German.
wow.
You have to do Latin and ancient Greek. So I can read, I don't know, like 6 languages or something like that, with varying degrees of skills. Some of them I'm very fluent in, some of them I'm less. I can speak basically English, French, some Greek, some Albanian, because my wife's from Albania. Those are my main ones. I have bits and pieces of others where I've worked, but not enough to have much of a conversation, though.
That's incredible,
Yeah.
dude. That's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
cool. I haven't heard you say that much on podcasts before.
Nobody's asked, actually. So,
Yeah. Well, I love languages. That's a big part of anthro for me. But
yeah, of course.
and yeah,
Languages
you
are
mentioned
important.
bringing more non-English speaking people into the chat that must not be named.
Yes, because in fact, we should bring that up. We are organizing a large online festival or carnival called Real Archaeology, with a lot of YouTubers, podcasters, TikTokers, blogs, everything.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I've been trying to reach out to some non-English language archaeology content creators, and a bunch of them are very interested in joining. I've talked to some from Italy, from Spain, from maybe France, I forget, Turkey, Greece. So we should have a good number of people that will have some non-English content, which I think is really important.
I think
Archaeology
so
is
too.
for everybody. You don't need to only know English to know archaeology, in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I learned Spanish in high school. I had an ex, and I learned Spanish, and I just kept continuing it. And now that I'm doing all this dog stuff, Mexico has like a wealth of like ancient dog stuff and like
Yeah, of
mythology and
course. Yeah.
things. So it's like really paid off being able to read those journals in Spanish, be like understand it, because it's not available in English. So there's just, I guess maybe now it is, but yeah, learning another language, I guess, for the audience is extremely beneficial. So I recommend it.
Yeah, and it's not easy, but I mean, there's all these apps today, but the best advice I got is get like a little bit of a core from like a class or something like that, or even those apps like Duolingo or whatever else there is. And
Mhm.
but then go there and force yourself to hear and learn from people there. It's not easy, but that's really the best way to learn a language. And so,
I would
when
agree.
you travel, force yourself to speak it and force people to speak it to you. You'll struggle for a bit, but it's well worth it. Yeah.
Do you find yourself like in a Sapir Whorf like kind of surrealness sometimes, where like you think in a different language and your personality is a little different kind of thing, or anything like that?
No, I mean,
No.
yeah, I with French, that's the one language where I'll sometimes, I guess a little bit with Greek, because when I'm there long enough where I might get some thoughts that pop in there. But I mean, I've never really been in a community for long enough where there's not people speaking English for that to
Gotcha.
become my thinking language. Certainly, there's different aspects of you that come out expressed slightly differently in a different language. So, certain parts of it will. I think I probably drink more heavily when I'm speaking Greek, for example, or Albanian, because in those cultures you're drinking raki in a sense, which is like this grape liquor, and so. Yeah, so there might be a different aspect of my personality that'll come out a little bit, but yeah, a different way of joking around or whatnot. But some of that's just the culture as well as the language.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love that stuff, man. So yeah, one last question in the beginning there. What exactly is a postdoc? Can you define that for people who might not know?
Yeah, so, after you finish your doctorate, so you get your PhD, now I'm Dr. Dibble. A lot of universities or nonprofits, they offer funds for you to then do a research project that's a follow-up usually on your PhD project. So in a sense, now you have the expertise to do it all on your own. Let's see what you can do in a sense and do more. And so those will range for a year to 3 years long usually. And they'll have different kinds of funding, different types of goals, different types of publications. But there's no hard and fast rule on what they are. But what it is it's a fund from some source, usually a university or a nonprofit, to do a research project that you propose. So for me, it was to study animal remains from the site of Azoria on Crete. And it was a really important project. It was one of the first big digs in Greece from like the classical period, really the archaic period is right before that, but from the historical period of Greece, where they actually paid a lot of attention to animal bones. And so it's easily the largest, most well-collected assemblage of animal remains from the historical Greek world. And it's one of the largest and best collected assemblages of animal remains from the entire Mediterranean. I've gone through, I forget my count now. I think it's like 250,000 specimens of animals from there.
That
and I'm working. Yeah, well, no, that's not identifiable specimens. That's total specimens. NSP.
See, here's the nerdiness.
Identifiable, I'm at something like 30,000.
All right.
And then with others, because I'm not doing the micro mammals or the birds or the marine mammals, it'll end up being something like 50,000, I think, total identifiable specimens, especially with all that shell. There's a lot of shell there. So I'm working with some Greek colleagues there. Dimitra Milana is doing the marine stuff. Katerina Papayani is doing the micro mammals. She actually has the same postdoc I had in Athens right now to finish up that stuff. And then Dimitri Mikhailidis, who's one of the coordinators at that lab, he's doing all the bird remains. Yeah.
Cool.
So a postdoc is kind of, you propose a special research project. It's postdoc in the sense that it needs to be done within 7 years of your PhD, usually. Some are for 5, some are for 10, but somewhere around there. So you're not a professor yet, but you have a research project that you're devoting your time to and your expertise. Yeah.
When I was a grad student, I kind of always viewed it as like a squire for like a PhD, but that's like not
some
really
of them. So there's some professors might get a really large grant. Like in the EU, or the Britain and Europe, if you get a European Research Council grant, I'm going to try to apply for one of them. Those are like millions of euros, right? And so with that kind of funding, you can build in funding to hire a postdoc that will then work on a not necessarily a standalone, but they'll be in charge of a certain portion of your larger project. And so that can happen where you have a postdoc that's like a squire. But to be honest, most postdocs are more like free agents. They're on their own. They have their own project that they propose, and it's their own thing. They might get some training from somebody at the institution they're at. It might be, nebulously under the umbrella of a larger project that a professor or experienced researcher has. But most postdocs you're sort of standalone on your own, if you see what I mean. So
yeah, totally.
my projects were my own projects, right? They were my own proposal. They fit into the umbrella of what the labs were doing that I was at, but they didn't they were my own project. I wasn't my own boss, because you have somebody who's your boss, but in a sense, nobody knew more about the project than I did. I was the lead PI on it, right?
Yeah, that's cool. I've never really heard it explained that way. I like that. Because I mean, I've met many postdocs when I was working here as a student, and there's still some here now, and it's just like the in and out, and then they're just such brilliant people, and they're your professor, but they're not a grad student. They're this like not untouchable, but like, this other echelon of intelligence that's in the department that I was always terrified to talk to because you guys just know.
Oh no, most postdocs are especially because they're not too far removed from grad students anyway,
Right.
and they don't have the hoity-toityness of being a professor. So they're usually very. I hope most of them are very chill people. But and some of it though, especially in America, as they become more common, it's become a replacement for the fact that there's not enough professorship positions.
Yep.
And so it's actually a real problem. So many people in my generation were just in limbo in this kind of like there's because and it's not our fault. People say, oh, there's too many people with PhDs. Fuck that. The problem is that universities have cut tenure track positions,
Right.
and instead most of the hours taught are done by people on crappy temporary contracts like the one I have now. And so this is a problem with how universities are managed, and they're spending money on building dormitories and stadiums and paying administrators and not paying the academics that do the teaching and the research that actually is their core function. And so one of the things that's happened is that in order to let people who will end up probably just doing teaching gigs get a chance to do a little more research, they have these postdocs in a sense.
Yeah.
And it's cool because you see so much cutting edge, awesome research coming out with them, but it's really a problem in terms of how highly trained, skilled academics are treated. They're not valued in our society. And that to me comes down to politicians and university administrators. It's a real issue because, the professors don't want this to happen. They want to, the senior professors, they want their positions to be replaced by people like them that'll end up in a tenure track position. But so often when people retire now, those lines are now cut. And instead it's replaced by someone who they pay peanuts to, minimum wage or something like that for teaching, and then someone else who they'll pay a little bit to postdocs. And so they still get the publications that the university gets, prestige from. They still get the teaching done, but none of those people are employed very well. And in the U.S., oftentimes they won't even get things like healthcare and stuff like that, especially the teachers.
Yeah, I've noticed that, especially with friends that are all now finishing their PhDs and getting into jobs. It's like you have, and you're right, it's not the fault of the professors or having too many PhDs. It's just like you're in this class of brilliant people who you've all worked with, and then you're all gunning for the same one position that's open.
And it's because as a profession, it's become devalued, and this is part of the reason why I do a lot of my public outreach. What I've found, my dad was a professor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've grown up in academia my entire life in a sense. And, it's really clear that in today's world, in 2024, the value of an academic, a scholar, a professor is totally devalued in the world around us. Like people don't fucking care. Let's just be honest. And at the same time, there's all this anti-intellectual discourse around, like all the hate that I receive from people, Graham Hancock fans, that call up my university to fire me. And it's like,
that's crazy.
And lots of them apparently. I don't really know. I have no idea how many have called up, but apparently a bunch of them have told that YouTuber that they're calling up. And it's just like, it's absolutely nuts how devalued we are and how disrespected we are when really all we've chosen to do is devote our life to understanding the human past. We never went into this for money. There's never a lot of money for academics unless you're in like business school.
Right.
And so it's just like, or you
I wish more people knew that.
Yeah. And so it's just like, if you're in humanities and social sciences, even if you get that holy grail, that tenure track position, it's still just a solidly middle-class position. Mm-hmm. And maybe if you're at an Ivy League school and you get a really lucky bounce, you'll have what would be, upper middle class. But like, that's it, And so it's just like, and for lots of people at public universities, it's lower middle class, right? And so it's just, there's this idea of us as like this elite intelligentsia, and it's just total bullshit.
Yeah, like they think we're on private jets or like, going all these crazy like Met Gala stuff, and it's like, no, it's archaeology. CRM is kind of like blue collar, and at that point,
100%.
In academics, it's still like, like my parents are nurses, and I'd say most professors have a house and like lifestyle that at the same as my parents.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, the only time I've ever flown first class was when Joe Rogan paid for it.
Oh yeah,
that's the only time I've ever flown first class. It wasn't even first class; it was business class because British Airways doesn't have first class on those flights. But it was wonderful. Like I loved it. It was very comfy. But that's the only time I've ever flown it. Right?
I didn't realize he flies you out. That makes sense though. Get all those guests in. Cool. Well, I wanted to ask. I have a million questions for you, but I'll try to to keep them into the thing. I don't want to put you on the spot, and you can think about this if you need to. What is archaeology to you? Like, how would you define it, and what does it mean to you?
That's the theme of my video I'm going to make for real archaeology. So
Okay.
this is just like totally, look, no, I can start with it a little bit. That's fine. I can't imagine that hopefully we'll hit different audiences, right? And so look, in my mind, archaeology is everything. I always tell my students or people online, just look around you. Like seriously, turn around, look up, look down. No matter whether you're outside or inside, everything you see is archaeology. It's part of the archaeological record. Even if you're like in the middle of the woods, it's still being managed by humans and is therefore part of the environmental archaeological record. And so, even our feces and the chemical signatures of them end up as part of the archaeological record, from our bones to what we wear, to what we listen to what we see and what we use, everything around us. It's really the study of everything that humans have contact with on a physical sort of level. And what's really, really cool about that is it because of the fact that it studies humans and it studies everything physical that humans engage with, which at this point, one of my friends who was a grad student at the archaeological science lab I work at in Athens, at the American School in Athens, Justin Holcomb, he just published a paper on the Anthropocene of the moon, right? He's a geoarchaeologist. And so it's like, on the moon, we have altered the landscape through the probes we've sent and the moon landing and stuff like that. We've completely altered the landscape in a way that we can study it archaeologically. There was a paper that just came out on the archaeology of the International Space Station and stuff like that. Anywhere you go, humans have had a physical impact. And what that means is every single discipline that you could think of in a university or outside of a university even, it can be integrated within archaeology. I'm about to teach archaeological theory. So like one of the jokes that I'll be telling my students is, look, archaeologists have no actual independent theory. We borrow from every single other discipline, like stratigraphy, superimposed layers in the dirt, comes from geology, right? Uh-huh. Systems theory, how we understand sort of a social system and the connections between the economy, the politics, the religion, the foodways, and the daily life and all that kind of stuff. That comes from understanding biology, ecosystems, and stuff like that. And so all the different ways that we conceptualize the past and we understand it and approach it methodologically. I do isotope analysis on animal teeth. That's organic chemistry, right? Combined with geochemistry, because I'm trying to understand the geology even of the regions these animals could be in. And so, everything we do is integrated with all these other disciplines. And so, it's why whether you do hardcore humanities stuff like languages and arts and stuff like that, or social sciences like politics and economics, or hardcore sciences like physics and astronomy and chemistry, all that can be part of archaeology. It's really such an all-encompassing subject because it's studying and also pretty much most methods you could think of, like stuff like IT, totally valuable, statistics and math, totally valuable for the analysis of archaeology and interpreting it and recording it and stuff like that. And so, it's just such a big topic. And that's why I think it's so cool too and relevant to everybody, because it really can touch on any aspect of people's lives. You're into sports? Hell, there's archaeology of sports. You're into fashion? There's archaeology of fashion. You're into politics? There's archaeology of that. It doesn't really matter what your interests are. There's a way to hook you through archaeology, if you see what I mean. And so archaeology is life, man. It's everything.
That's excellently put, dude. That's how I put it. I would describe it as like understanding human behavior through time. And whether you want to go into material culture or not. But that you're hitting the nail on the head for me, because it's like, it is everything. Like you can do CRM on the moon now. Like there's a cultural site on the moon.
Yeah.
Which is pretty crazy.
And like, it's even, and that's what's different about it. That's what's unique about it too. I'd say the one thing that's so different about it than anything else is, well, one, it connects with so many disciplines, but two, it's the only study that really has a deep time perspective on humans. Human history only goes back a few thousand years. You talk about archaeology, it's the only way to look at what we're doing right now and even thinking about what we're doing in the future, and also what we did before humans were around, right? What hominids and our ancestors were doing. And so it's that really just this mash of different time perspectives, which I think is also valuable to get people to think a little differently and and try to think about, we're just this one small speck at this point in time, at this point in place. There's so much more to who we are and where we come from and where we're going.
Right.
Yeah.
Well put, man. I respect that. Do you, and I know in grad school, we're kind of like, we got to read Binford and we got to read like all these other, Mouse and the cultural stuff, Malinowski, like, do you find yourself pigeonholing yourself into one kind of paradigm, or are you more like processual or post, or do you just kind of do whatever?
I'm weird.
Okay.
And it's also why I thought I should be the one to talk to Hancock. I am weird,
Yeah.
but it just has to do with my weird background. Like my dad was a Paleolithic archaeologist who studied stone tools. He was the first person to like design a GIS software for archaeologists. Is what it's called Newplot. On the site oldstonage.com. He was the first person to shoot in an artifact with the total station back in like 1980 something, like 83 or 4 or something like that. And so, like he was hardcore out of the University of Arizona, processualist, formation processes, digital scientific approach. And I had no interest in doing archaeology. I went on his digs, like I grew up on his digs, but then when I was like 15 and 16, I started digging on some of his digs. And like when I was little, I sold beer and sodas to the excavators for like 5-cent markup. I had like a little, I had like a little wagon that me and my brother would pull to the site at the end of the day. And like, we made like 2 pennies, but like, it was awesome. We were like 6 years old. So, like, that's cool. You sell a full day's worth of selling beers. You get to go buy a candy bar or something like that. And, or soda yourself. And so, yeah, so I grew up in that situation, but then I started doing archaeology when I was 15 or 16, but I didn't really want to do it. It was just to go to France and have a vacation in a sense. And I had to work, though, if my dad was going to help me pay the way. And so I did that. And then when I went to university, I was first a philosophy major, then a history major. But then I found I was taking all these ancient history courses. And I said, I didn't even know there was a degree called classics. I was just like, why is that not called history? So I became a classics major. And then I went back on one of my dad's projects at Pech de Laz, and I realized, you know what? I really like traveling. I actually do like archaeology. So I'm going to do this. And I don't want to do this in the shadow of my dad, because he was a reasonably famous archaeologist, among archaeologists at least. And so that's why I chose classical archaeology, because, in anthropology departments, everybody's heard of my dad. In classical archaeology departments, nobody's heard of my dad. They've never even heard of any of the stuff that happens in anthropology departments. And so in that sense, I have this sort of science training, and then I went on to do zooarchaeology, where I do environmental science, and I do a lot of database and GIS stuff myself as well. And so I have this background where, like, I read ancient Greek, and I've learned like hardcore, literary history and classical history and how to interpret, post-structuralist approaches to the iconography of ancient Greece. That's like what my professor, my main supervisor, does, right? She does art history. That's her training and stuff like that. And so I have all these different backgrounds. And so if I was anything, I'd say that I'm a neo-processualist. But I'm a neo-processualist of the type that I recognize why people take humanities approaches. And in many ways, I call myself a scientist who's trying to write history. Right, I'm trying to answer historical questions using a scientific methods and an approach, and I take a very different approach towards that because of that mishmash. And then that's also why I said why I challenged Graham, because if you think about the topic of Atlantis, I learned when I started doing outreach a few years ago on Twitter. I wrote all these Twitter threads and stuff, and mostly about dogs and like animals and animal bones, and they did quite well. That's why I have 40,000 followers there. But like, everybody starts asking you about Atlantis. And so like, I slowly dawned on me, man, Atlantis is like the big thing in the public perception. And then when I learned about Graham and what he did, because I started doing some research on this after the show Hunting Atlantis came out, and I had these Twitter feuds and stuff like that. And so I realized, man, I am the best prepared scholar to tackle this question, because the modern version of Atlantis takes this stuff from an ancient Greek text by Plato, the dialogues of Timaeus and Critias, and then places what's going on there back into the Stone Age. And so the only way to accurately tackle this phenomenon in the modern day, you need someone who understands both historical archaeology and prehistoric archaeology. Because if you can't do both, then you're only able to tackle one little bit of it. And so that's why I started writing this book that I'm writing on Atlantis, where a third of it is about the sort of ancient Greek stuff of it. How do we fact check Plato? How do we understand the context of the Platonic dialogues, all the different dialogues Plato has written, and how does these two dialogues slot into it? And what does that tell us? How does it map onto the archaeology of Athens and stuff like that? And then the next third of it is, okay, in the modern day, we think of this as an Ice Age culture. How do we actually, and this is what I presented on the Rogan podcast, how do we actually look at it in our evidence for the Stone Age period, right? What do we say about, Ice Age archaeology that's underwater on the coasts and stuff like that? What can we say about, Ice Age archaeology in the Amazon and stuff like that? What can we say about the domestication of crops and stuff like that, and how that has an impact on this? And then the last third of the book is going to be, what's the big impact of this in the modern world? Why is this relevant? Why does this matter? What's the role of the sort of, it's how it's embedded in conspiracy culture, and how it's embedded into sort of catastrophism and stuff like that. And then what can real archaeology actually say about topics like climate change and collapse and stuff like that, if we're going to jettison this whole sort of fake archaeological approach, right?
Yeah. That was a perfect answer, because it segues into what I want to talk about next. But
Perfect.
well done, dude. Because, I'm going to be real. There's probably a text or two of me that we can find and dig up, if Jamie were to pull up the chat, of me being like, who's this fedora-wearing nerd that's going to talk about, like, why is he representing all of archaeology on the Rogan podcast? Because I'm sure a lot of us applied to do it. And I was like, who? And then I was like, oh, he's Harold Dibble's kid. And then did all that. And then when I watched the Rogan thing, dude, I was floored by how prepared, how well, and just like, because I thought you were like British when I first heard your name.
No, from Philly.
And then you just hit him with American archaeology science, and like gave him archaeology, and you started with it wasn't the sex pots, it was the
sex pots. That's what I started
the Greek sex pots.
Yeah.
And I was like, where's he going with this? And then like you hit it, and I was like, oh, I see what he's doing. And then for 5 hours, dude, I was locked the fuck in, because you destroyed him, and you did stuff that I wouldn't say destroyed, but like, because it sounds mean, but like you just presented archaeology. And I watch a lot of Rogan. Like, I don't mind him. Like, I like comedy. I watch him for that. Not his comedy, but when he has comedians on. And I know kind of what he's interested in from hearing stuff. And like, all you had to do was just show science and like use archaeology, show it as a science, and he would respect that. And like, I was watching through the episode, him like look over at Hancock and being like, oh, that is some bullshit. And then he would look back at you and like trust. And I was like, you are killing it, dude. So I guess with the paradigms and your background, whatever it is, I was wrong. I judged you at first. I was like, who is this guy? And then like you just, it was a home run, dude. So I respect that.
Thank you.
I mean, Flint, what do you make of these figures? What sort of ethnic group would you think they belong to?
I don't identify ethnic groups like that, man. Like, it's a stone carving. This is actually an example of the problems here, because you cite Spanish colonial literature about, say, a white Quetzalcoatl coming. You talk about this as different kinds of people. Yes, you do in Fingerprints of the Gods.
We got to get correct on this. We got to get correct on this. Are you saying...
It was a lot of work, and I mean, like, I went into it with open eyes, because, like, how do you represent an entire field and that kind of... Because, like,
right.
People don't understand this. You like talk to people in other fields, and it's like, why would you do that? Talk to a pseudoscientist, and it's like, man, Hancock is platformed by Amazon as having the bestseller in the field of archaeology. He's platformed by Netflix as having a docuseries, IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes and whatever, call it that. Wherever you look, he's legitimized, and like he's mounted he did mount, let's say. I think he failed. I think that's been proven now, because he won't even talk about that podcast. That's how much he was destroyed, because he just ignores it. The day it came out, he said it came out. Since then, he's not given a single interview about it. He's not done a podcast on it. He's not done a lecture on it. He hasn't brought it up at all, because he knows that it ruins a lot of his fans' impression of him. And but I went in there with very much open eyes, with the sense like I was doing this research on Atlantis, and it was like I was doing at the same time I was learning who Graham Hancock was, right? And I wrote some stuff about him when the show came out, and that's how it happened. I wrote this Twitter thread that went really viral, which led to an op-ed in The Conversation, which also went viral, which led to a talk at the University of Vienna for their archaeological sciences and human evolution thing that's on YouTube. And so I was slowly learning who Hancock is. I'm reading his books and I'm seeing his engagement, and I'm just like, somebody has to engage with him because he's really popular. He's really taken seriously, not just by like ordinary people, but by very powerful celebrities. People like Keanu Reeves, who's going to be on the next season of Ancient Apocalypse. And like, nobody's getting the picture of, and the problem is, I like my colleagues. I love my colleagues. I love many of the archaeology communicators on YouTube and podcasts, but I always was dissatisfied with people's approach to him. In general, people would take the debunk approach, where you take something he says and you say why that's not true, right? And the problem is with Hancock, he goes to so many places and brings up so many things. No matter how many of them you debunk, people are just going to say, well, there's these other things, right? And the thing is my dad's colleagues, you know, when I told them I was doing this, they're like, what do you mean he has stuff to do with the Ice Age? I thought he was in the pyramids. And he does this whole like sleight of hand thing where he situates it in the Ice Age, but then he never looks at any actual Ice Age evidence. He only looks at, you know, post-Ice Age evidence, right? And it's this whole sleight of hand to like get people to think that the Ice Age is this big question mark that we know nothing about, when in fact, we know a fuck ton about it. And so like, you know, I always knew it was actually, so I always knew I wanted to talk about Ice Age archaeology and domestication and food stuff like that. That's what I did and I wanted to talk about Atlantis. I had a whole thing on Atlantis and Greek stuff to talk about, but we didn't have time. I have a podcast I did with Danny Jones that's coming out on that in a couple weeks.
And you mean on Rogan you wanted to talk about that?
Yeah, I had a whole thing prepared on that. And but it was the sex pot start that made me say, I'm going to do this. I have the way to start. I have the way to bring this home, and like to really just ignore what he says and show what we do and how we do it and what it says about those periods in question. Because that's the thing, is he tries to get you to pay attention to XYZ when the only way to really disprove him is to show that there's also A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. You know what I mean? All that stuff. And so many people, they just debunk him by sticking to XYZ. And it's like, that's not how to prove people that he's wrong, though. That's how to prove he's wrong on XYZ. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, not how to show that his entire thing is wrong, because it is. It's just bogus, you know?
Yeah.
It's just bogus.
You mentioned several times like ephemerality would be the word.
Yeah.
Like, you
the
said like
ephemeral
this,
nature
the
of
bones are ephemeral nature. There you go.
Yeah.
Like this, like we find these tiny little bones which are ephemeral, or these stone flakes. And like I've done CRM all over North America, and I've stuck so many shovels in the ground. You can't walk 20 feet without finding flakes. So like, and when you hit them with, okay, where's the stone structures of the civilization? Why are we finding these ephemeral bones and stones? Like I saw the gears in Rogan's head like turning, and it was just so cool because it's just basic archaeology.
Yeah.
Just to say like, hey man, there's flakes everywhere.
Yeah.
And
you want to go underwater? Let's go underwater. You want to go to coast? Let's go to coast. You want to go to deserts? We'll go to deserts. We've explored all these areas. Is there more to explore in all of them? Hell yeah. But like, we've done
and
a lot
Sahara
there,
thing.
and you know, my dad found thousands of sites just from that period, right in the Sahara, all hunter-gatherer stone tool sites. You know, it's just like, so many sites all over the Sahara people have targeted with early agriculture and earlier, because we can see them geologically, these wadis and stuff like that. You can track where to go for any period because you understand the geomorphology of it, right? That's what predictive modeling does. That's what tells us where to search. And you know, I think that was the other key, was showing how we find stuff, right? You know, to sort of have Jessica Cook-Hale there talking about how she creates predictive modeling of where to dive and then goes find stuff from that period. And it's just like, you know, that was really the key goal there, was to really try to put on a class of what is modern archaeology, 21st century archaeology, and like, how do we do it and why, you know, because there's a reason no archaeologists subscribe to Hancock's ideas. I guess there's that one student that mentioned on that one channel that he does, but there's no archaeologists with a degree and a teaching position anywhere that subscribe to it. Not because if we did, we'd lose our jobs. If I had evidence for that civilization, I'd publish it and get funding to explore more of it. You know,
Absolutely.
like,
Yeah, it would make so much money.
it's just like, fuck, it's just because there's nothing. And it's not only that there's nothing, we have evidence directly against it. I mean, science advances by discarding hypotheses that do not match the evidence. And that hypothesis has been discarded over the last 150 years, time and time and time again. And, you know, this is just the latest iteration of us showing why it's discarded, you know?
Yeah. I got asked, this was when I was working as a collections manager for the Corps, but asked to be on a TV show. I think the NDA is over now. For its Science Channel, I think is what it's called.
Okay.
And we went and filmed a pilot, and it was me and this military guy, and like we were supposed to go investigate, you know, ancient mysteries and stuff. And when they hit me with the pilot, oh, we're going to send you to San Diego, we're going to send you to Mexico, we're going to send you to somewhere else in California, I forget where we were. And of course, it was Cerruti, and then it was those like macrocephalic heads in Mexico. And I was like, oh, this is this kind of show. So I hadn't heard of Hancock. I knew of Rogan's show, but I didn't watch all the time. And then my friend was like, just watch the Hancock episodes and like see what, you know, you're up against. And that's when I first got introduced to Hancock. So then I read Ancient Americas or whatever the
America Before.
America
I think.
Before.
Yeah.
And I sat there and I was like, if I didn't know anything about archaeology, I would find this to be utterly fascinating. And I understand why people, you know, are into that. But just knowing basic archaeology, I was like, this is just not the case. But what really bothered me was how he like vilifies archaeologists and says like the Clovis Mafia and stuff, and like, which I may or may not allegedly be a part of if that's real. So, because I got points sitting right here. And I just dug up a mammoth this summer. But yeah, it's like, that bothered me so much. And when I went to California to film this thing, oh, it was talking about, not Naledi, Nali, the Mexican girl that fell in the pit.
Okay. Yeah.
They have her body.
Yeah.
10,000 years ago. But I'm sitting there with what was his name? The guy who did the paper for Cerruti. And I'm trying to be cordial and like, you know, it's his paper. The cameras are on me, and they're like, "Is this evidence of a pre-Clovis civilization?" And like my head's just screaming, "No!" Like there's no evidence of that. But like I know the camera crew there, the producer and stuff, they have a job to do. And like, I didn't want to disrespect their job by being like, I'm not going to say that, because like they just want to get done with the day too. But in my inside, I was like, I can't say that. Like I looked at the rocks, they showed it to me and they're like, oh, that's fascinating. It was just a rock with a scratch on it, dude. It doesn't mean like they were.
Yeah, see, that's all I can say though. That's what I would
Yeah.
say. Like, yeah, just like I did the Rogan, you know, like screw that. Like, look, I like, you know, my biggest problem with Cerruti is it's just like, as a zooarchaeologist, their key evidence of sort of anthropogenic, meaning human modification, is spiral fractures. And it's like,
Right.
man, that debate happened in the 60s and the 70s when like a whole bunch of faunal people, as they were back then, were like spiral fractures. They did some experiments of like twisting bones to try to recreate them. And they said, that's from extracting marrow. And then Binford comes along and does like a series of experiments that demonstrates the spiral fracturing of a bone just means that it's fresh. It's still greasy. It's not a dry bone. And it's like, I can't believe that got published. They must not have had a zooarchaeologist review the paper. Because I mean, who does not know that spiral fractures are not a sign of human modification? That's just a fresh break, man. And so,
and it was in Nature.
Yeah, I know. It's just like,
yeah.
I mean, you know, that because I'm sure this will be come up on the season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, which is about to drop. And I already started talking to Milo Rossi because he did we were together in Miami and Mini Minuteman, and so he did a thing on Cerruti, and he mentioned in his interview there, he's like, yeah, I didn't want to take one side too hard or the other, and it's just like, dude, this is really clearly not an archaeological site. Like,
yeah,
it's really super clear. It's not like, oh, hominids couldn't have been there. No, that's not the issue. There's just zero evidence for humans or hominids. Yeah. It's just zero evidence. There's no good evidence for it to be human modified or human made. Same thing with the rocks. You know, there's just nothing. There's no bulbar percussion on a flake. There's no, you know, there's nothing that we would normally use as evidence for humans there. And so,
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I said was like, I tried my best to stretch it out and try to explain, like, if this was human 100,000 years ago, it's Denisovan, if anything. And like when they did
Homo erectus something.
yeah, something. And like when they finally sent me the edit of like the trailer for the episode, it was like the dun dun like on my face when I said that, because it made good TV. But they just tried to get me to say that yes, it is, and I refused to, and like as polite as I could.
Yeah, I'll definitely be polite about what I say most of the time, but I'm just too blunt of a person. I'm not gonna.
I respect that, because I wish I had just been like, no.
Yeah, because I'm just that's probably why I'll never get a major TV series, because I'm just gonna speak what I believe to be true, and that's it. Like I can't like. I'm happy to maybe not talk about certain things because I have to for some reason, ethically or NDA wise or something. But like, I'm never gonna like say something, or even if I'm gonna be silent, I'm never gonna be silent in a way that I think shades the truth in a way that's disingenuous. Like my biggest issue with how archaeology is in the public sphere. I don't know if you saw my peer review of the hominin lady stuff.
I didn't.
But my biggest issue with Lee Berger and the few PIs there is I don't think especially in the first round, they did not present their evidence in an honest fashion. It's just not honest in the way that.
And it wasn't peer reviewed, was it?
No. I did a YouTube peer review. I was like the first one to speak up about that publicly in like a really clear. I did it in honor of my dad because it came out a week before the anniversary of his death, and my dad was a leading scholar of Neanderthal burial, specifically showing why so many earlier sites that were thought to be burials were not burials, right? He went and re-excavated some of those sites, like several of them, La Ferricie and Fontéchevade, and maybe even Roc de Marsal had one, I forget. But in all of them, he demonstrated that the methods they were using, and when you look at it from a geoarchaeological perspective, there's no good evidence of this being burial, and it's most likely not. And so, it's just sort of like, so that was one of his big research angles. So when that paper came out, I was like, all right, Dad, in your honor, I'm going to read through this paper and give it a peer review on my YouTube. And so I did that. And that was my first actual YouTube video. And it went, by my standards, it had a lot of views and everything. And, but it led to me getting all kinds of different collaborative opportunities and stuff like that on that. And it's just like, it's just about how you honestly present stuff, man. That's what we should be doing. We don't need to make what we do over exaggerated. Like it's just stupid. It's
completely
like
agree.
People like what we do. I know this for a fact. I'm pretty good with the public. And before I went on Rogan, I've given lots of public, lectures at like Pint of Science or at schools and at retirement communities and different events for adults at museums and stuff. Dude, people really like archaeology if you just explain it to them in a clear, interesting, not over-exaggerated fashion,
Yeah, no, totally. And having done that pilot and then seeing like the success of the interview on Rogan, which I'd still love to talk more about that. Like, how would I explain it? And with Stefan Milo's channel, Milo Rossi, I haven't met him or ever spoken to him one-on-one, but I've seen his TikToks and stuff. The way that has grown and like the interest people have in that makes me happy that these like the show I was doing was clearly geared towards as like middle-aged guy sitting on his couch after work watching some conspiracy show, like history show, how History Channel goes. And that's a demographic for sure. But I think just you and I talking right now is more interesting than anything like of that with that production quality and things like that, or just like your Rogan debate, any one of Stefan Milo's videos, like hopefully the industry, if they start picking up on this stuff, realizes that is more entertaining than this melodramatic, is it possible it's an ancient Clovis civilization? Like, it's just so odd to me that we're not, because it's fun stuff. So I'm just glad more and more people are coming out of the woodwork,
and it's like, it's producers, I don't know, look, TV stuff like changes slowly because there's these paradigms and BS like that. So I'm not expecting some immediate shift, but I think we are starting to see it on social media. I was certainly not the first one. Like you said, Stefan and Milo. Stefan Milo and Milo Rossi are two of the leading people on that, but others too, on Instagram and TikTok, like that are really doing. David Miano's done a great job, and it's just like what I think we're showing is that there's a lot of people that are interested in nerding out, right? You can still get home and have a beer or smoke a joint or whatever the hell it is you do and nerd out on real archaeology with high quality production value. It doesn't need to be overly academic in any way. Like, even when I teach at an Ivy League university, I speak like this. This is just who the fuck I am, right? You
Right.
know, like this is how most people I know in the field are. Even archaeologists are generally, because we work in the field, are fairly blunt people. You know, we just say it how we see it most of the time. Obviously, the most famous ones are sometimes put on airs or whatnot, but the average person who's doing field work is not. And you know, so I think there's I also think that, and this might have been that maybe I'm one of the leading edges on this, is I think that there's becoming more and more of a pushback on this conspiracy culture. People are,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people are getting tired of this kind of fake crap that is pervading our society, the digital ecosystem, the TV world, the whatever, the news media world. There's just so much fake crap, and I for sure am tired of it. I've already tuned out of a lot of stuff unless I can be sure that it's vetted in my own to my own satisfaction, because like I'm just tired of it. And my impression, especially since I went on Rogan, just from all the feedback I've gotten, is I think there's going to be a large cultural backlash against the popularity of all this kind of conspiracy culture stuff. I sure hope there is. And I don't know. That's my I'm not some cultural figure too much, so I'm
Sure.
an academic in my own little world, but that's kind of my impression. I think a lot of people are really tired of the popularity of that stuff, and I'm hoping we're going to see a lot more sort of nerd out type stuff that comes out. It's just real stuff, right? The real picture of what archaeology is doing, or take whatever XYZ field that you want, right? You know, it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
archaeology. It's everything. Yeah.
I think it's just, well, contrarianism. It's just like, I mean, Rogan sells contrarianism very well to people, like just to, but well, or devil's advocatism is what I would say. And I'm like that too with some friends sometimes, like just in a healthy way. But I think a lot of this, like once people realized with Instagram blowing up and TikTok blowing up, what goes viral quickly is this like, well, what are the archaeologists not telling us kind of contrarianism? And that blows up, and then Rogan, eats that up, and people like Rogan, I should say too, that gets eaten up. But it's been really cool to see over the years other academics and archaeologists like you and me coming out, knowing how to use that virality, but using it with actual facts and data. And it's like, I think you're completely right. Like that's going to hopefully overtake that stuff, because with what you demonstrated, it's like, because I went through and watched a bunch of YouTube shorts of people, and it's like Dibble interviews Rogan or Hancock, and people either completely butthurt that you destroyed him, and they're trying to say that you made up stuff. What did you make up?
I
And
cited
then also,
everything. Like,
like,
not
I was
a
like,
single archaeologist thinks I misrepresented shit. Like, if I
So
misrepresented somebody's research, they'd be all over it because I cited them on screen. They'd
yeah,
be
that
all
too.
friggin' over it. I know my colleagues; they're not going to hold back on me. Like, are you kidding me? We never hold back on anyone. If you misrepresent me, I'm going to say so. And same thing with them. Like, it's just,
Absolutely.
fuck. They're not going to let their own stuff be misrepresented.
Yeah, and that's very, especially in paleoanth, you'll see a
Yeah.
lot of that. But I saw way more people say like this Flint Dibble guy destroyed him, and like that made me so happy. And I got into not an argument, but like I post stories on my Instagram all the time. My
Okay.
Instagram is my biggest like platform,
Okay.
and
I just joined Instagram after this.
okay, cool. I'm happy to show you around. I was very bummed that the SCA put out that big statement against Hancock in the beginning, because one, I didn't sign it, I had nothing to do with it, and then like that then represents all of archaeology, and I understand it in spirit, I get it, I'm with it, but it's just not something I would have done, because that just further fuels his archaeologists are out to get me kind of thing, and and it's fine that it happened, because I do agree it's damaging. What he says is damaging. But my followers, like people that are other archaeologists, were like, I don't know, man, I agree. Like it should have happened. Like we really shouldn't be engaging with him and stuff. And I said for like 2 years, we should be sitting down and talking with him, and then like not just ignoring this stuff, because that only further fuels his archaeologists don't want to talk. And it was him and the geology guy, Randall Carlson.
Yeah.
said that like no archaeologist will want to sit down with him
Yeah,
and
that's what they
talk
said on
because
that
he'll
thing,
be
yeah.
right. And then you sat down with him, and it's funny that you said he won't talk about it because it was a smackdown.
Oh
Like,
yeah. And I mean, I
yeah.
have seen either publicly or in private messages to me something close to or maybe more than 1,000 posts of people that were like, I was a Hancock. I went into that as a Hancock fan.
Yes, saw a
I
lot of
left
that.
as an archaeology fan or a Flint Dibble fan. Like
How
thousands
does
of
that
posts.
feel?
Oh, look, I mean, I did not actually expect that. I went in there to try to talk to people that were in the middle, just people who were curious about what Hancock has to say, but they don't really
Uh-huh.
necessarily believe him, right? But they're curious and they wanted to know what an archaeologist would say about it. That was the crowd I was shooting for. I did not expect to make inroads on his own fandom, his own audience. And to be honest, I actually think it's his fault that happened more than mine.
Because you took it so personally. Yeah.
Well, I think he went in there with a really weak strategy. I mean, like, it took me a couple weeks afterwards where I finally realized, he actually went in there as scared of me as I was scared of him, right? Me,
That's
I'm just
good.
some little archaeologist. Of course, it's this big setting. Never had this kind of media training. Both these people have media training, and Rogan is a giant Hancock fan and, produces his show and stuff like
The
that.
biggest.
Yeah, and so, well, maybe not anymore, hopefully. And
Yeah.
so, like, I went in there obviously terrified and did my research because, like, all right, this is an opportunity. Somebody has to take this opportunity. I was convinced I was one of the better people for it for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. And then I had a very clear strategy in mind, which was very different than the strategy of the people I talked to. Many people were like, you got to debunk this, you got to debunk that. And I'm like, I'm not going to debunk anything. Like, I'm going to teach people archaeology. That's my strategy. Like, and these ways that relate to what he talks about, though. And so, so I talked with like 20 different people. They gave me some slides and some images. They gave me readings. They gave me some opinions and thoughts. And I did 2 mock debates with John Hoops playing Graham Hancock. And so John Hoops, of course, being Graham Hancock's arch nemesis in the archaeology world.
Right.
And so, and so I went in there very, very well prepared, and I had all my strategy. And I did a lot of research on misinformation and disinformation and on how to approach that as well. My strategy was very much informed by the up-to-date research on that. And so I went in there scared as shit, but Hancock clearly was scared because he didn't want to talk about anything archaeology. If you look at what he wanted to talk about, he wanted to try to smear the characters of archaeology and of me.
Yes.
And if he wanted to talk about any sites, it was geological sites, not archaeological sites. Bimini Road, Yonaguni. When he brought up Gunung Padang and he's trying to smear me because I had the actual excavator from Indonesia who excavated the site. And like he's trying to say you guys laughed about Danny Hillman. And Rogan's like, let's talk about the site, Graham. Let's actually talk about the archaeology and see the difference between Flint and Europe. And Graham's like, we don't have time. This presentation is about Flint and how he controls the media. And he didn't want to talk about any archaeological sites. We brought up Göbekli Tepe. He didn't want to talk about Göbekli Tepe. When it came to the Sphinx in Giza, all he wanted to talk about was about how it mathematically related to the precession, right? He didn't want to talk about the site or any of the archaeological evidence. And so he went in there extremely scared of me, thinking that I would be really well prepared to debunk him and make him look like a fool on different archaeological sites, when in fact that wasn't my strategy at all. And if he would have gotten me bogged down in that kind of stuff, I don't think he would have succeeded with the people in the middle, but I think he would have succeeded in muddying the waters with some of his fans who were very inclined to believe him, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, totally.
And instead, he just conceded all of archaeology to me and just let me roll with it. And it was just like, and I didn't realize this till like 2 weeks afterwards. I was like, man, he went in there really scared. And I actually think that it's really a lot on him that he prepared the wrong strategy for keeping his fans, because he could have gish-galloped me on a ton of archaeological facts that I would never have had time to respond to them all. And therefore, his fans would have said, oh, yeah, but Flint didn't respond to that one or this one or this one. So therefore, maybe Graham's right about them. Because it would have been impossible for me to respond to them all. That's why I didn't even want to try to debunk most of his stuff, because that's a losing proposition for the audience who doesn't know what Gish Gallop is. It comes from these arguments between evolutionary scientists and creationists, and specifically this one named Duane Gish. And Duane Gish, what he was a master of is he would just muddy the waters in a debate by just spouting off way too many false facts. And the scientists would try to correct as many as they can, but it takes so much more time to correct one false fact than it says to say it. And so it's
he's just piling on more.
And so that's what a Gish Gallop is. Like Donald Trump does this. Lots of people do this in today's world. And so, what I'd like to write an article on this is that the best way to defeat a Gish Gallop is to make sure that you just create a clear narrative and you keep the context. You need to keep control over the context and the narrative of what you're talking about in the debate. That's the key. Don't get off rail. If you get derailed and have to deal with debunking too many different little things, you're never going to succeed in fighting off a Gish Gallop, if you see what I mean. You just need to stick to the narrative that you go into that conversation intending to have. And so that was my goal there. But I think if he would have done a proper Gish Gallop on me like I was expecting, I don't think I could have won over as many of his fans. Instead, he just decided to try to smear me. He thought I was going to go in there and just say he's a racist or something, which I've never even called him a racist. So he really misread me. I don't know why he misread me on that, but that's what he thought I'd do, and I didn't.
Yeah.
And so
there is a lot of that I have seen on like Twitter and stuff of people having said that.
Yeah, a lot of people have, of course.
I know. And in 2020, like I was, like when the whole racial tensions was super high, like I was all about that too, and was like, oh, it's like white supremacy. And somebody even told me like, bro, I don't look at the Coliseum and say I'm proud to be white. And I was like, that's really funny, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like if these people aren't that's a whole other topic, but we don't question Stonehenge in the same way, So.
There are a lot of racial issues with Hancock's ideas. They come from colonial ideas, like literally directly from Spanish colonial ideas that the Spanish crown was using to claim lands. Or even worse, the Trail of Tears, where Native Americans were dispossessed from their land and they were marched out west, right? Andrew Jackson, in the legislation that caused this, specifically cited these ideas of a lost civilization that built the mounds, saying that Native people did not have rights to those lands. Yeah. So there's a real strong history of racism and white supremacism and colonialism with these lost civilization ideas, which needs to be acknowledged. And as Steph Holmhofer, I don't know if you know her, she's a grad student at Alberta, and she just published a chapter on the misappropriation of Hancock's ideas by outright neo-Nazis. Like outright neo-Nazis that they don't like Graham Hancock, by the way. They think of Graham Hancock as a race traitor, right? They don't think he's one of them. Nobody's claiming this is Hancock, right? But the reality is these neo-Nazis have written and talked about how
co-opted.
They use Fingerprints of the Gods as an introduction to the idea that white cultures are superior. And so it's like, that does not make Hancock the kind of racist or anything like that. That's why I've never seen him write anything or say anything that says white people are superior to people of color.
Right.
And he seems to have changed his mind on his civilization, and maybe it is American people, right? That were his lost civilization. I don't really know what he thinks on that, but like I'm nobody's trying to, at least I am not. People who are really well informed on Hancock and have done their research and read him, nobody's trying to say he's a racist, but the history of the ideas that he cites has strong racism, and there are very clear racists who weaponize his ideas.
And he should be responsible.
And he should address that at the least. He's not responsible necessarily, but he should take some responsibility to make it so that doesn't happen, so that he clearly addresses that is what I think he should be doing. But I'm not him, so I'm not going to really tell him what to do. But those are clear, important aspects of the culture within which his ideas are received, right? And so,
and I think that's where he, in my mind, lost the debate, or like it started to go very downhill for him, because he got bogged down in that counterculture, and it was, they were pulling up that like you said stuff, or like then that became a whole thing, and like they pulled up a tweet of yours or something. And it just it derailed from the archaeology, and I saw him getting more and more flustered. I saw Joe being like, well, like this, why it gets back to the archaeology. And then you were just clearly uncomfortable because they're accusing you of stuff. And it just got so odd when it could have just been more about debate. But I understand why he wanted to do that, I guess, if that was his only strategy, but it just didn't wasn't a good look for him.
I mean,
you know?
I think he just misread me, which was odd because
Yeah.
I'd written a lot about him, and I'd given presentations and it was public. And it's like,
Yeah.
I think he really thought I was going to go in there and call him a racist. And so he wanted to have a defense against that. And I think he probably thought
yeah,
I demanded, I said, the only way I'm doing this is if I go first, right? That's my one demand. Other than that,
Yeah.
I want this to be free flowing. I hope that we'll have some periods where we can't interrupt each other, but I want to make sure that I get the first one of those first. And my read is that he just misread me and thought I'd try to go in and make the argument that he's some evil racist or something like that. When, like I said, I've never found any evidence. That isn't what I believe. And I'd never
You just
written
talk
that.
about rocks and
Yeah, I'd
bones.
never written that. And so I think that's what screwed him. And I think it's just because I don't know. I mean, whatever. Like I think
Yeah.
he misrepresents our field. I think he purposefully drives hate towards our field. So I'm glad he misread me, and I'm glad he got destroyed in that debate, because I think that
Yeah.
he's really bad for society in the way he draws up hate. And I do think that he does open doors towards other conspiracy theories and other more subversive cultures, including these racists that co-opt his work and use it to draw people towards them. And so I am totally fine with having destroyed him and having him misread me. I'm very cool on that. Good.
Yeah.
It shows he's not as smart as he thinks he is, if you see what I mean. Because if he would have done his homework into me, he could have done better. And that's actually was another thing. What's that? Mehdi Hassan. He's the anchor on MSNBC. He does a lot of debating, and he wrote a book on how to win every debate. And while I was on Chemo, I read that book, and it was something that gave me a lot of heart, because it said, look, whenever he debates somebody who's like a really high profile, right? Those people never do their research because they're so high profile that they just rely on their media training. And so they don't research you because you're just small little beans to them. And so it's like, he didn't bother to do the work, and he got destroyed for it because, to be honest, it's the truth of his ideas too. He doesn't do real research into archaeology. So he's lazy and creates narratives that are based off of really half-assed research.
Yeah. And my major thing with my issues with Hancock, or not, maybe issues isn't the word, but why I disagree with him, or something I think that keeps him, he's putting the stick in like the pegs of his bike, you know what I mean? Like the spokes. Like he can't see past civilization. Like he's very civilicentric. And the idea that hunter-gatherers and like hominids existed, and that slowly, gradually turned into the Neolithic and then into civilization, or, civilization I'm putting that in air quotes for the listeners. Like he can't see past that. Like civilization had to have given rise to more civilization. And to me and you, I'd imagine, I don't speak for you, like I think it's more fascinating that hunter-gatherers can then go from that into, us doing a podcast right now over the internet across the ocean. I think that's more cool rather than some like civilization gifting knowledge to like us, if that makes sense. And
I'm with you. I mean, I don't even know. I sometimes think that I'm not sure if it's purposeful or not, because archaeology is so weirdly represented in the media, but he mainly argues with some straw man, outdated version of archaeology. He thinks of this, that archaeologists present some, what is it? The ladder of society. What am I trying to say? The birth of civilization, the linear progression. That's the words I'm looking for. He constantly says that archaeologists present this linear progression of civilization. And it's like, today, that could not be further from the truth. There are very few archaeologists in the 21st century that subscribe to that view of prehistory and history. It is just so old-fashioned and out of date. It's really like a 19th, early 20th century version, maybe up until processualism in the 70s.
Historical particularism, isn't that it?
Yeah, no, it's
Boaz's
linear.
version.
Historical particularism is looking at things in
It's
a
the
much more
opposite of
particular way. Yeah, and
Okay.
but this is just this idea. Western civilization is one of those tropes where there's this linear progression from the Neolithic Revolution to the Industrial Revolution to the Information Revolution. And it's like, dude, historians and archaeologists today, we acknowledge that history is just what people do. And so there's no like teleological end goal that we're going towards. Like, and this is just something that the public, I think it's how we teach history in like high school. There's this, to make it simple, we show it as simple to complex. And that's just not reality. And I mean, I even blame Barack Obama in his speech when he left office. I remember watching his last speech, like his last day in office before Trump takes over. And he talks about this arc of history and how in the end, historians in the future will judge what we do because we know that we're moving in this direction. And it's like, dude, we're not necessarily moving in that direction, though. What history is what people do. It's what we choose to do. There's no end way that we're moving. And so, like, I even think that the entire political philosophy of progressivism, and I would identify myself as a progressive, but the entire idea there is that we're constantly improving and getting better and more advanced. And it's just like we're constantly doing things to make our welfare better. And it's just like that's the philosophical underpinnings of this. And it's like on all sides of thinking, that's what a lot of people think of history, as this linear progression. And it's just not the case. It's just, that's not how history and prehistory works. And he argues against this kind of straw man of what archaeology is, but that's how the public sees it. So therefore it jives really well with the public, and it makes it more difficult for us to combat, because we need to not only show how he's wrong, we need to show how the public doesn't understand what we actually think and do. Unless they're unless they took university level archaeology and history, right? Because otherwise people don't have the appropriate understanding of what we do, because it's not taught anywhere properly, right? Yeah.
That's a good point. I remember watching that speech, but it didn't hit me that way like it did for you. But you're right, because that's not how history goes. And I even told my students this when I was teaching. Like, you can have, the Neolithic to the Roman Empire to the Industrial Revolution. Sure, like that's what happened, or like how we would view it. But the people that live in the Amazon have been there for 10,000 years, and they exist just fine with that culture. They didn't have to go through like collapse and fall of the Roman Empire. Yeah.
Notice how to construct this narrative. We just need to jump around it from place to place. So it's like the Roman Empire to the Industrial Revolution. And it's like the Industrial Revolution happens in Northern Europe. The Roman Empire is in Southern Europe even. And so like you're talking about, and so Western civilization somehow includes the Greeks and the Romans, but not Arab cultures that actually preserved a lot of that literature that the Renaissance scholars ended up using, right? And so it doesn't include the Arab world, but somehow it includes Australia and Japan. And so it's just like the way we construct this kind of Western civilization makes no real sense. It's just a made-up construct that we have invented to tell ourselves, and put stuff in an order that sounds good, but doesn't actually match history and prehistory, right? Not in any way at all that does justice to it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, totally. That's a really astute point. I didn't even think about Japan being included in that. I guess because they're like...
part of the information revolution is one of the main reasons why, right? And so, yeah.
That's very true. Was, when you were at this Rogan studio and stuff, was it all cordial beforehand? Like, was there any animosity, or was it like nice and stuff?
No comment.
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't that bad in any way. The way I'll put it is, I'll say Graham was a little frosty beforehand. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Joe was...
I guess I'm asking because I heard you said like you hugged it out afterwards.
Yes, afterwards. I think he was very happy at first because I didn't call him a racist, I guess. I don't know. Joe was also extremely happy. I think Joe realized this would be a really top episode of his, and so he was very pleased with it. He realized people would like it, if you see what I mean, and watch it and tune in. And people have. It's 6 million views on YouTube. I don't know how many on Spotify, but that's his biggest platform. So I'd estimate it's got to be over 12 million. I don't know how many, but so a lot of people. And so Joe was extremely happy, and that was very infectious, I think, with Graham, and I was just relieved for it to be over. I didn't necessarily want to hug Graham because I'm not a big Graham Hancock fan, but that's okay.
Sure.
If I'm happy, he is a human. And I will treat him like a human because he is a human who deserves to be treated like a human. And so, so yeah, he was very happy at the end. He was fairly frosty at the beginning, but I agreed not to talk about too much of the setup for the stuff. And so therefore, I don't want to reveal anything that might be under that agreement. I don't know exactly how they prosecuted or whatnot, but yeah, I want to be careful. Yeah. Nothing weird happened, though. I want to make this clear. Nothing weird happened. No strangeness, no badness, no no extra goodness. It was
cage
just,
match.
it wasn't anything crazy or anything like that. It was just, there was a little bit of frostiness before it started, but it wasn't anything crazy. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad it ended up, you guys hugged it out or whatever, or at least left,
Yeah.
cordially.
Well, I mean, I was hoping he actually, as he put in that one tweet where he claimed I conned him, he sent me an email that night saying, hey, you speak really well for your cause. It was, it was good to talk to you. And I sent back a really nice email as well. And then we didn't have any communication until 2 months later when he decided to launch this attack on me where he promotes these YouTubers that have been harassing me since. And so I don't think we're very cordial anymore. Let's put it that way.
That was my next question,
Yeah.
was how has your life changed since then?
And mostly not much at all.
Okay.
Let's be honest. I'm still an academic. I suppose I'm now incorporating more public engagement, but I was doing public engagement before that. I've been doing public engagement since 2018. And really before that, I gave tons of talks when I was a grad student to local different institutions around Cincinnati. We had this really well-funded program for grad students to go to elementary through high school and to retirement homes and different other organizations and give talks on research and stuff. So I've always done a lot of outreach and public engagement. But so more of that, and that's becoming more of an important thing as I realize that it's important, I think, for more scholars to speak up. I'm willing to. And people seem to vibe with what I have to say. So that, I'd say, is the biggest change. I don't really make much money from it, so it's not actually my biggest focus right now because I need to pay the bills. And I get paid not very much from anything I do. So that's always the top priority, is how am I going to pay the bills? But I'm hoping that I can do more of that. I have a literary agent, and we're trying to sell my book on Atlantis, which is, I told you the synopsis of it earlier. Right. And then I'm doing more podcasts and YouTubes, and I'm trying to level up my YouTube to make it into something more real. I want to put it on Spotify as well. I need to find the time to do that. And I think it's important to strengthen this ecosystem of creators, that I'm one of many voices, and there's a lot of really good voices among us. And so that's why I really wanted to move forward and do this Real Archaeology Festival that we're trying to organize, because I think there's a lot, people think of YouTube as just pseudo-archaeology. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of non-pseudo-archaeology out there, and I'm hoping we can really showcase that and show just how strong our community is and tie us together, both for more collaborations, but also so the algorithms realize we're more related than like a pseudo-archaeology creator. And so,
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think that's important too, is to sort of train these algorithms by linking us together in these ways. And I have some ideas on how to do that. And I'm glad that more of us are starting to talk, because I think we need to really take back these airwaves, if you see what I mean. I think that's really important for us to, speak up louder and bigger. And since I have more of this connection with journalists and media now after that event, that should hopefully help all of us, not just myself. And yeah.
I agree, man. It's especially after the debate now too. It's like really cool to see how many people you swayed. I mean, we already talked about that, but just how much, because I told you I like comedy a lot, and I watch a lot of comedy podcasts, and there's even like podcasts that called Podcast Cringe is one of them, and it's like the drama of the week from all the different comedy podcasts. And you were on one of them.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
I
wasn't a fan of how I was portrayed on that, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think he said Flint, my dad's an archaeologist, Dibble is what he called you. One of them, which funny, but
whatever. Yeah, I don't care. I have thick enough skin for that kind of shit.
Yeah, but it was just funny to me to see like my worlds collide, because I watch this guy a lot. Like when he's dissing somebody I don't like, and talking about some drama, and then like to talk about, he was like, there was this archaeology debate, and the fact that like he was like, this guy knew what he was talking about. It was like, it was really cool to see that, man.
And I mean, I wish I wasn't so nervous, because I feel like I didn't get to express my personality in the way I usually am, just because I was nervous, and
you had a lot on your shoulders.
Yeah, it was a nerve-wracking environment. I mean, but yeah, I think I overall did fine, but I think my personality could have shown a little better if I was a little more relaxed, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Totally. You did better than I thought I would have, because that's got to be nerve-wracking. And yeah,
I had my first panic attack in a decade, like 2 weeks before I went on, and like I was just like curled up, and I was just like, this is gonna ruin my life. I made the worst mistake of my life. And then it was also because I just got off chemo. And so I didn't have like all these emotions and stuff. And so like I felt I conquered my nerves when I was in my 20s. Right. And like, so I had to do that again. And in this high profile situation. And so I had this major panic attack and I finally calmed down. And I was like, all right, look, this is all on me. I've prepped. I have this whole strategy. As long as I don't let them derail me, I'm not going to like shit the bed. I'll do fine at least, like I'm not going to like, I just need to make sure I know what I'm doing and go in and do it. But it's still, I was certainly nervous. Yeah.
Yeah. Last question about the debate, then we can move on to something else. But I forget how it came up, but he brought up the Quetzalcoatl thing, and then you had just like, I'm assuming, a slide ready to go.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the researcher, but she was discussing and whatever that was, whatever you did was excellent, because I remember specifically seeing like the gears in Rogan's head turn.
Can I pause you for a second though? We know that once indigenous people are colonized, that they try to at least alter their beliefs, and if not indoctrinate them into whatever beliefs they have. And we have recent evidence for that in North America, with how Native Americans were treated when they were put on reservations and brought into school systems and forced Christianity and told that they couldn't use their language. I mean, we have very recent evidence of human beings trying to impose their ideas on the people that they've conquered. It makes sense to me that would be something that would also would have been done by the Spaniards that entered Mexico.
Yeah. I'm not persuaded by that in this case. The myth is too widespread, and that constant reference to a bearded figure is very odd. And as a civilization bringer in a time of chaos, in a time of disaster after a great cataclysm. Again, I mean, Flint and I can disagree on this. I'm intrigued by that information, and I don't think that the indigenous peoples of the Americas were so easily hoodwinked by the Spaniards.
I don't think it's hoodwinked. I think it's conquered.
Where he was like, oh, I don't think it's like gifted, it was conquered.
Yeah.
Like the way, whatever. Can you tell me more about that?
That was like, in my mind, one of the key moments of the debate. And yeah, I set that up very carefully.
It was a light bulb for it. Yeah.
And it was really important because it also, like you said, it got Rogan on board. And I remember thinking to myself at that time when it was going on set, and I was just like, don't say anything. Don't say anything. Just let this happen. Just let this happen. Like let them talk it through. And like, cause like, yeah, Joe really did recognize what I was trying to do. And like, that was a tough one for me because Mesoamerica is not my key area. I was never in an anthro department. I've always been in classics. And so I've learned a lot about American archaeology just preparing for that conversation, and now preparing my YouTube for the upcoming season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse. I have a video with Jennifer Raff dropping soon, and I'll do one with John Hoops in a couple weeks, both to set up a pre-bunk on what we expect Hancock to talk about. And I have more that I'm doing. I'm going to do one with Curly Tlapoyawa, who is one of the archaeologists who actually I featured in a little video at that moment. And he's the host of the Tales from Atlantis podcast. Him and I forget the name of the other host right now, but I met Curly at the SAAs afterwards. Really nice guy. And so he agreed that he'll do a reaction to Ancient Apocalypse season 2 with me for my YouTube. And cool. So I mean, so to demonstrate, because I didn't want to talk about race at all, like for multiple reasons. One, I actually don't have any evidence or really think that Hancock is a racist. So I thought he'd want to do that because that's red meat for the audience that Rogan has, which is like an academic accusing someone of being a racist. That's like, boom, that's what they want to like then attack on social media and whatnot. And so like for me, I just didn't want to even bring that up because I don't call Hancock a racist. And it's a tough audience to explain the nuanced argument of the colonialism and stuff like that. And so I reached out to various people, and I'd done my own research into the Quetzalcoatl stuff. Like I had a Twitter thread that came out 3 days after the first season of Ancient Apocalypse where I brought that up with Quetzalcoatl. And then I did more research, and I realized there's this earlier manuscripts that show Quetzalcoatl, and he does not have white skin. He has dark tan skin, right? It's really clear that to the indigenous people, he was not white skinned. It's a Spanish imposition and twisting more of the myth. And it's not just in Spanish areas. Captain Cook, There's stories of Captain Cook going to Hawaii. He's treated as like a god. It's like, this is such a common trope for European colonists, that like they like to come away from an encounter and say we were treated like deities. It's just like, fuck that. That's just colonial bullshit propaganda. And sorry, I swear way too much. I apologize.
Fuck it, dude. That's all good here.
and so I had that sort of set up, but at the same time, I don't know all the details behind this because I'm not someone who studies this stuff. So I got in touch with Curly Tatwayawa and Marika Stoll. And, they were not the only ones I recorded. They were two. I also showed a little clip of Jessica Cook-Hale with the underwater archaeology, because I'm not an underwater archaeologist. I had probably 8 or 9 clips from different people. They agreed to record a 1-minute, 2-minute spiel for conversations I thought that might come up on topics that I am not an expert on, but I could use their knowledge and experience to then jump off into things I can talk on. And so it was very effective, and it's good to be able to get different voices out there. And because, as you know, archaeology, I just went into, archaeology is everything. Archaeology is so big that there's no one person that could grasp all of it. It's just not possible. There's just so many sites and regions and periods and artifact types and disciplines and methods and everything. It's just like you can't represent the entire field. Nobody can. And so so that's, I wanted to make sure that's why I made sure to have a bazillion citations on everything to make it clear. And it was funny, like a lot of the audience, they thought they were like my ideas, and they're like, yeah, Dibble with his, and I'm like, none of this was my ideas. This was me presenting the consensus on all these topics. What was my idea was how to weave them all together, right? And that was my idea, was how to weave it all together into a clear argument that goes up against this lost ancient civilization narrative. And that's, like I said, that's why I wanted to do it, because I had the experience and expertise of my own to be able to bring to bear on that. And so, So none of them were my ideas. It was very much the consensus of the field. And that's why no archaeologists have really had a problem with what I've said, because all I've really done was represent what the field has a consensus on, right? None of I wasn't claiming credit for any of them.
And I think a lot of the public probably think like all archaeologists speak for all of them. Like it's a unanimous agreement on things. And that seemed to be part of his debate strategy too, was like you had to speak for everybody. But I very much admired, I would say is the word, how you brought that clip up, how you used it. And then like, I didn't realize you were giving the space for him to like sit there and think, but it was just well done, man. And like even as you said, like discussing race and stuff, it's always sticky. Like you don't want to get bogged down in that.
Yeah. You discuss race in one way and one community is going to be after you. Discuss race in a different way in a different community.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a topic that's such a hot button political issue that there's no winning way to discuss it. Like with everybody, you're going to get people that hate you. And so if you're in an environment where millions are going to see you, I am not an expert on race and racism, so I would prefer not to say stuff on there on topics that I'm not an expert in. I always try to stick to what I'm an expert in. When I think I'm different than a lot of media figures in that sense too. Like if I was just on the Bridges podcast hosted by Destiny, who was like this progressive streamer, and he kept bringing up politics, and I'm just like, I just kept bringing back to archaeology because like. I'm sorry.
I saw some.
It's just that's not my thing. I'm gonna stick to what I know. And I'm not going to stick to what I don't know when I speak publicly. I'm very careful about that because, I don't want to fucking put my foot in my mouth. And You
did a great job on there, both you and Milo. I watched those 2 days ago.
We have a new one coming out with them as well. We did a round table with both of us together. So cool. I think that comes out Thursday. They just released a 10-minute clip from it just a few hours ago. So I think the new one comes out Thursday. So that'll be good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep an eye out for that one. And then the last questions I have for you, if you don't mind sticking on a little longer.
Yeah, go for it.
What was your PhD dissertation, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it was
the elevator pitch.
Animals and social change in ancient Greece. So from the Bronze Age down through the classical period. So I studied zooarchaeological assemblages from a few different sites. One of the main ones was from ancient Athens, from the Athenian Agora. Where I still do zooarchaeology there, and then a few on Crete and a few in southern Greece. And the thing is because of the divide between classics and anthro that we sort of already talked about, There are
Mhm.
no scholars that focus on a lot of archaeological sciences topic in ancient Greece. What happens is you get someone who does zooarchaeology of North America, and one of their colleagues in the classics department at whatever university they're at has a dig in Greece, and they say, hey, come study my animal bones. And then you get this report from somebody who focuses on hunter-gatherer societies, and they just put together a report that doesn't really integrate it into the archaeology of the culture. And so
Mhm.
there's now one other, but and I am the first zooarchaeologist who focuses on historical Greece, right? There's nobody that does that. So I was trying to put together the big picture of how what animal bones can say integrated in with the sort of art historical and other sort of social changes that are well known in the field of classical archaeology, right? Because my training
Yeah.
is both zooarchaeology. My department shipped me off to Sheffield in the UK to learn zooarchaeology from Paul Halstead. That because otherwise I would have had to do it in America, and I would have learned hunter-gatherer zooarchaeology, which is a
Right.
totally different way of analyzing your assemblage. You handle mortality profiles differently. You handle isotope analysis even differently. Just the way you interpret the data is totally differently, because you need to actually understand how people manage animals versus how they hunt them, right? It's totally
Yeah.
different. You have a different range of variables. You can't use stuff like species richness because it's all domesticated animals primarily, right? And so it's just like
Mhm.
a very different range of questions that you ask, even though it's the same kind of material. It's kind of like studying pottery from one culture to another, if you think of it like that. Someone who studies pottery from like Mesoamerica can't just go and study pottery from classical Greece. It's just not the same
Yeah, yeah,
sort of
yeah.
thing. And then at the same time, you don't know the literature, and so that's what it was. It was animal bones from the Bronze Age, through the Bronze Age collapse, into the Iron Age, and then into the birth of city-states and the flourishing of city-states in the classical period, and to try to put together kind of a big picture from some of the larger assemblages that I studied. I studied some of the largest assemblages that exist in the Greek world: Adazoria, Knossos, Nicoria, Athens, and a few other smaller ones. And then, of course, collecting all the data that had been published some in gray literature, mostly though in book chapters or appendices, usually in books. And just most of it's just like really just tables, species counts is what a lot of the publications were. And so to try to make a story and narrative out of that. So one of my big things was with an article I had that came out a couple years ago, which is after the end of the Bronze Age, I worked with some climatologists that I met at some conferences.
Mhm.
We're actually going to collaborate and do another paper together now. We just got in touch recently this last week, and there's some people out of Uppsala in Sweden, Martin Finet and Erica Weiberg and whatnot. And so to try to understand how food economies adapted to climate change at that time, because one of the realizations people are coming to is everybody's interested in climate change right now. We're getting a lot more high resolution paleoclimate data sets from the Mediterranean world. And you can't use ice cores in the Arctic to put together climate in a smaller region, right? It just doesn't work.
Mhm.
It's like global warming now. We don't call it global warming because not everywhere is warming. It's climate change because in different areas of the world, it's
Right.
changing in different ways. And so same thing in the past. So now that we have more high resolution data sets from speleothems, stalactites, stalagmites, and pollen cores and stuff like that, we actually understand that the collapse of palatial society at the end of the Bronze Age, it correlates quite well to a period where it gets very dry. And it starts a few hundred years before this collapse, and it continues for several hundred years afterwards. And the problem is a lot of this paleoclimate data, it tells us it gets drier, but we don't know how much drier, right? Because it doesn't tell you the millimeters of rainfall or anything like that. It just tells you that
Right.
it's drier. So one of the bigger complaints is always like, well, how much did that climate change impact agriculture and food production? And so I went through and I collected all the different data sets of animals, Bronze Age and Iron Age, and compared them. And there's a big shift where the taxonomically, so species-wise, it shifts from, in most periods of Greek prehistory and history, sheep are the most common animal. But for this period of dryness, it's goats. And what's really interesting is this shift from sheep to goats only happens in drier regions. So areas which today have a lot less rainfall. And so it's
Hmm.
because of this adaptation, they wanted to adapt to that climate change. So they shifted their animal husbandry strategies from sort of a sheep heavy economy to a goat, because goats are better adapted to a drier landscape like that. And so that's one of my big arguments is, yeah, climate change was a major driver in the end of the Bronze Age. We can demonstrate it because we can see that it had a big impact on their agricultural systems and their food production systems. Here's that data. And we know that because they adapted to that. And we also know that it took them hundreds of years to adapt to it in some places. In some places, they adapted quickly. In other settlements, it took them hundreds and hundreds of years. And so, like that matters a lot when we're thinking about our own climate change, for example. And it's also really important to find that kind of example in the past. So that was one of my other big hypothesis is about how food production was I call it so because a lot of my contexts come from settlements rather than rural areas. So you can use animal bones to look at food production, but you can also use it to look at food consumption and the processing of food, like butchery and stuff like that. And so what I see is in a place like Athens, when it starts to become a really big city, on multiple different scales of evidence, not just animal bones, but ceramics and everything, how they eat changes just drastically, right? They go from what I would call a rural lifestyle to an urban lifestyle. And one way you could summarize it, have you ever seen the cartoonist, The Oatmeal?
Yes.
Yeah, hilarious. We should look up, I'll find this cartoon so you can put it up on screen.
I'll put it up.
Yeah, so he has this one thing where it's Asian food in a small city, and it's like one restaurant, 5 different cuisines. Asian food in a large city, 5 different restaurants, 5 different cuisines, right? Because, you're in some small town, it's just Asian food, or they call it Chinese food, but it's got a little bit of Korean, it's got a little bit of Chinese, it's just got everything, right? But in a large city, it's all those different things. And so food sort of becomes like this in ancient Athens, where you start seeing a whole new set of cuts of meat being developed. You see these new cook pots. It goes from just one type of cook pot, where you can make like a soup, basically, to like 4 different types of cook pots that you can do braising, stewing, you can even fry in them. And then like the professional butchery shows up where they're using cleavers now to chop through the bone to create completely different cuts of meat, right? And so you get these new kinds of cuts of meat that show up. And so it's just this whole new sort of cuisine that develops in Athens over the span of just a couple hundred years as it grows into a larger city. And so that's another one of my big conclusions, is how you can sort of track urbanism in the Greek world from the zooarchaeological record. And what I've sort of shown is a bunch of Roman zooarchaeologists, they're wrong. They see the development of the cleaver as a sign of Romanization. Screw it. It's actually a sign of urbanization, because you see it even earlier in the Near East and in Greece. And so
which is a result of climate change.
Well, no, that's after that period of climate change. That's a few.
Oh, that's after the period. Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about too many hundreds of years span. So climate change is like from like 1500 down to like 800 or so, 900 BC. That's when it's really dry, and the collapse happens around 1200. And then the development of these cities in Greece, at least, happens sort of like 600 BC down through like 300 BC. Yeah.
Okay. It's amazing how much you can tell.
Yeah. Yeah. And another big conclusion I have is because I also read ancient Greek, and I'm working on publishing this. I'm way behind. But there's this database. You know Packard Bell, the company Packard Bell?
No.
You never heard of the computers, like Packard Computers, Packard Bell?
Oh, Hewlett Packard.
Hewlett Packard. Yeah, sorry, that's what it's called today.
Yeah,
it used to be Packard Bell. Sorry. The Packard family, one of the members of the Packard family was this guy, David Packard. And he was a classicist. And he developed the first database that had all of ancient Greek on it. Every single ancient Greek literary source. He developed this in like the 80s, right? And so it's called the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae. It's now online. So what I do is I do a big data analysis comparing animals in ancient Greek texts to animals in the archaeological record. And it's like night and day. It's like 2 different pictures of the past. Like I told you, sheep and goat, that's the main thing in the zooarchaeological record. In the written record, it's all cows. It's like they're all just eating cattle, like big burgers and steaks, and like that's all they eat, right? Is like barbecue friggin' cattle. And so, what I always say is the truth is actually in the trash. I compare this to the Tucson Trash Project. You know that garbage project that happened? You probably...
With the garbology thing?
Yeah, the garbology thing. They went door to door, and they sort of asked people, like, what are you throwing in your trash? What do you eat?
Yes.
And they even though it's anonymous, we lie to ourselves, right? We say, oh, we eat healthy food, and you have junk food in your trash. We say we don't drink that much. There's a bunch of booze there. We say we don't consume pornography, but there's a bunch of porno magazines in the trash, right? And so it's the same thing in ancient Greece. They talk about all the cattle. That's a sign of wealth and eliteness, but they eat a bunch of sheep and goat. right? And so it's like there's this big divide there between how you portray yourself and what you write about and what you care about versus what you actually do. Like your Instagram, you post your sexy stuff on Instagram, I imagine, rather than your schlub stuff.
Sometimes, yeah. Very true. You want to show, like, the hits, not the misses, kind of thing. But with you're saying, so in archaeology, you can see that a cow was just to sum this up, cows were more in cattle a status symbol, so you see that more on the fancy pots, but the actual people were eating sheep and goat.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, those are my three main strands with it. Yeah.
How, just quickly, would you define zooarchaeology? Because it seems to be like it's a.
You really like this
works for you.
definition game, man.
Yeah, I do. I just like hearing what different people think about stuff.
Zooarchaeology. I mean, I think it. I mean, I do it a little differently because I include like literary sources and artistic sources, but like it's typically just seen as analyzing the physical evidence for animals in the archaeological sites, really. So anything to do with humans and animals.
Yeah.
But we combine it obviously with understanding of ethnozooarchaeology, so modern cultures and how we treat animals in different ways, and we combine it with historical sources and artistic sources, and we combine it with different things like, even the study of human remains that show people's diet. So in that sense, it's much broader than just the remains of animals themselves. And in particular, a lot of new analyses focus on just even trace remains of animals, meaning like DNA in sediments or proteins in people's plaque, right? And stuff like that on dental calculus. So in that sense, it's very expansive. But at its core, it's looking at the evidence for each and every way that humans and animals interact. And so I would think it needs to include history and artistic sources as well. And obviously, it includes from the deepest past to the present and beyond. So yeah, that would be the best way I could go about it. Everything animals and human that you can get at. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're a cat owner, correct?
I am. Tavro is not here right now. He has an injury, but yeah.
I often ask people, like, what do dogs mean to you? If you have an answer for that too, but cats are pets in general as a zooarchaeologist. And
I mean, I had dogs growing up. My wife was the cat person, which is why we have a cat. I don't know. Pets are they're part of your family is the reality of it. If you have a pet, like how I have pets, they become part of your family because they live in there with you. They celebrate with you. One of my papers on the site of Azoria, Crete, I really like this. You'll like this.
Okay.
So I know you like dogs. I got to send you my Twitter thread on dogs. But I've always wanted to demonstrate to all the naysayers, there you go, why we actually look at dog gnawing on bones, right? And like the typical reason, the typical reason we do this is because it tells us about taphonomy, right? It tells us dogs gnawed on bones. That's why you're missing the proximal humerus because the proximal humerus is not very dense. But that's why you have a distal humerus because it's very dense, right? Like this part versus that part, the density of the bone's different. You can understand biases in your assemblage of animal bones. So I was super, super excited, man, when I did my statistical analysis of dog gnawing at Azoria. Now, Azoria, like I said, it's that really big assemblage on Crete, big dig, but excavated with modern methods to collect intensively scientific samples from all over. And it's a big dig. So we have the areas where the citizens feasted, so the large-scale sacrifices for the citizens, and we've excavated the households. So we can compare what the diet is like and what people are doing in these different spaces. And it's so friggin' cool. The areas with proportionally more dog gnawing are outdoor spaces. Makes sense. Outdoor spaces, dogs get bones that are thrown out. Perfect. Very cool. Taphonomic. It shows a little bit about behavior and whatnot. And indoor spaces, it's where the feasts are being prepared in the kitchens of the communal dining building is what we call it. And so that means that dogs got more treats on feast days from the people who are cooking the feast.
Oh, okay.
And so in a sense, when you think about a pet, yeah, when you celebrate Christmas or a birthday, you oftentimes get something special for your pet, right? They're part of your family. And so in a sense, we could show, or I think I could show that because of that statistically significant difference in those rooms, that dogs got more treats as well during a public feast. And so they were part of the community, if you see what I mean, like in their own way.
Yeah.
And so that we have that on some pots. We have some painted pots from Athens where you have these diners and drinkers on their couches lavishly eating, and hanging off the couch are the animal legs that they're going to feast on. And sometimes underneath the couch there's a dog, and because it's
In the paintings?
Yeah, in the paintings. And there's a new article that just came out about this. I need to read it because I saw the guy's presentation, but I need to read his article. And in the mouth of the dog, you can see the hoof of the animal's leg that he was given as part of this treat, right? And so, because the painter
That's
has
awesome.
to show it in a way that's recognizable, and so the hoof is very recognizable, so they show that hoof kind of coming out of the dog's mouth. And so, you get that sense of the dog's getting that extra treat during a nice feast like that. And so, so I think we can even capture that aspect of pethood. That said, to the ancient Greeks and even today, I think it's important to recognize that there's all kinds of nastiness as well. There's this well in Athens where puppies were they were street dogs. Street dogs were sacrificed.
Sure.
And today we have our puppy mills. That's why I had puppies in my mind, because we have all of the different ways that we mistreat animals today. And so it's important to recognize, as well as we treat those members of our household, there's a lot of other ways that we are mistreating animals out there. And we should be recognizing that and working to alleviate that, because it's disgusting. And we should not think that we're better than ancient people just because the ancient Greeks ate dog occasionally, and they certainly did occasionally, not just rarely.
Everyone did.
So did everyone all over the world. And so, we can't look down on them, because the way we treat friggin' dogs in all sorts of contexts is disgusting and terrible. And the same thing with how we raise animals for food. We need to work to improve that. And, that's something I think that's key. We don't just hate on the past. We learn from it and learn about ourselves.
That is the best answer to that question I've had yet.
Well, I'm a zooarchaeologist like you. So.
I learned something from that's true. I learned something from that. It's crazy when you go through dog remains, like seeing how many pathologies they have too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you see a lot of that, but just like rib kicks which could be from fighting with other dogs, like falling or getting tossed. But yes, domestic dogs have had a hard life, I would say, for most of history until 1980. But
I think even since then, I think they still do. I think a lot of them in a lot of contexts still do. There's a lot of feral dogs and stray dogs all over that live rough. And like I said, those puppy mills and the way breeders, the scandals that go on with sort of professional breeders is really terrible. And so I think that we need to be more recognizable of the impact that we have before we bring them into our household, and the dogs that we don't see, because there's a lot we just don't see, right? Out of sight, out of mind. It's kind of like a lot of people that get mistreated in our world. Out of sight, out of mind. We don't recognize what's going on in the world around us, to a lot of stuff, from the environment to animals to our fellow people. And so we should pay more attention and try to make the world a better place, and not shut our eyes to all the injustices out there.
Well said, dude. And then the last one, and you can take a moment to think about this. I also asked this to everybody, but I'd be very curious to know yours. What to you does it mean to be human?
Ooh.
And this can be philosophical, this can be zooarchaeological, this can be Hancockical.
Fuck, what does it mean to be human? I have no idea. That's a tough one.
That's a good answer too. Yeah.
Man, what does it mean to be human? I mean,
you could also talk about favorite thing about being human, maybe too.
I mean, so that's a really tough question, especially I'll just draw on some archaeology, because that's, like I said, I'm going to stick with my expertise. I was going to start talking about being self-conscious, but I find that to be problematic, because I think there's humans that I would consider humans that are not necessarily self-conscious for various reasons. Before an infant gets language, for example, or people with different disabilities, it's tough to gauge how they are. And that was originally what I was going to say, but I don't think that's the right answer for that reason, because there are philosophers that treat even infants as less than human because of that. I've written about this on Twitter, because they're all into animal rights, but they're not for human rights for people with disabilities. And And so I find that problematic. So I don't want to go that route. I'd rather go archaeologically. And that's a really interesting question if we think about that archaeologically. And it's changed a lot in the last few decades. Developments, especially new methods with human DNA, have really expanded what it means to be human, because for a long time we defined it based on anatomy of the skeletal structure, right? And so we have this idea of anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, and that was defined, and that's what made us human, because we can distinguish us on a taxonomic classified level because we have this kind of jaw, this kind of brow, this kind of cranial capacity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's clear now that because paleoanthropologists no longer see human evolution as a human tree, where there's like this origin where you have this tree with its branches coming out. And I'm going to be teaching a class on this. And because I'm subbing in for somebody who's on sabbatical, I sort of need to, I'm going to try to change it some. But one of their assignment is to create a goddamn human tree of hominid species. And I'm like, no,
fun.
that is not how people who do human evolution conceptualize that anymore. They conceptualize it as a braided stream. Because now that we can actually track DNA, we recognize that Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans, have bred with Denisovans, with Neanderthals. We recognize this in earlier hominid lineages. They separate and develop as different populations, and then there's some intermingling. And so instead of seeing a human tree branching out, we see it as a braided stream. It separates, then comes back, and separates, and then comes back. And so we need to see Neanderthals as humans, because everyone in the world, in Africa too, in America, everywhere in the world, people have Neanderthal DNA and genomes. We have Neanderthals in our ancestry. And so in that sense, what human means has gotten very strange and very interesting and very weird, because we do know that Neanderthals behave differently than humans. The way that their stone tool assemblages and how quickly they change, for example, is different than with humans. It's a big debate over whether Neanderthals buried their dead or not. And one of the big things is it looks like the clearest evidence for it is in Southwest Asia after they already start having contact with humans. So maybe that's due to that contact, if you see what I mean. And don't quote me on all this because I'm not up to date on some of the latest things in this debate. But
sure.
But so if anyone's listening, don't hold me my feet to the fire. I'm going off what my dad said and some of what other people have said, and I'm not. But the point being that what being human is, we need to expand our horizons. We need to recognize just how interconnected we all are as a human species, but also how interconnected we are with different lineages that are now not so much extinct as absorbed into us. In many ways, is how we need to think about Neanderthals and Denisovans, because they're part of all of us. It's part of all of our heritage. And so, I think that's really cool to not anymore have just, you think about Darwinian biology and stuff like that, and there's these sharp lines between species. It's much better to see it as a continuum. And if we start to see it as a continuum,
I would say it's a spectrum.
Yeah, spectrum. Yeah. And in that sense, man, we have so much in common with chimps and with great apes and with all kinds of other species out there, including dogs, because behaviorally we've and even anatomically with the way their faces have changed, with the sloping of the cranium to give more pronounced eyes. All these different species we've domesticated in some ways to resemble us. And so what humanity is, it's why we see humanity in our pets, right? And so, I think seeing it in a more inclusive, nuanced, and interesting perspective is probably the way to go in the future, and to speak up ethically for everything we can. I am definitely a meat eater, but I definitely think we should be raising animals in an ethical way.
Absolutely.
So, I think that's the way to go, and we should try to treat the world with the respect that we treat our fellow humans, and we should definitely try to treat our fellow humans with the respect they deserve, because we don't most of the time. So, yeah.
You went from saying "I don't know" to having probably the best answer again on that question.
Stop kissing my ass, David. Come on.
No, it was good, man.
To everyone you have on your podcast, but come on.
I do, yes, but each one is a uniquely good answer.
There you
so
go. Yeah,
I respect
and each
that.
human is uniquely cool too. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Flint, I appreciate you coming on. I'm glad we got a chance to talk.
Yes.
Where can people find you, and what are you working on next?
Yeah, so find me either on Twitter or YouTube at Flint Dibble. I'm at a bunch of other social media as well: Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook. But my main ones are Twitter and YouTube. And I'm trying to make
Okay.
YouTube my real primary one for presenting archaeology to the public. And then I'm writing a book on Atlantis. I hope to sign a contract over the next few months on that, so we'll have more information. And then we're doing this Real Archaeology Festival, which I think is the big thing that I want to move towards over the next month and really promote all the other creators. You'll be involved, as will like dozens of others. I think we'll probably end up with 50 to 100 different people producing content for this.
Put that here.
And it's going to rock. Yep. And otherwise, I'll just keep producing some YouTube videos and maybe doing some writing, some op-eds for magazines or newspapers. And obviously, I have my academic stuff as well that will keep coming out. So I'm all over. I'm easy to find because my name's Flint Dibble. And yeah, I pretty much think on most platforms I have the @Flint Dibble claimed. Some troll stole that web domain from me when I lost it when I had my cancer. So I need to get a new website. I haven't decided on my domain, and I'm not announcing it here.
Fair enough.
And yeah, so that's where I am. Find me, and I expect to do a lot more public engagement. And in particular, YouTube. I think that people engage well with visual perspectives on the past, and so I want to do more of that. I think that history and archaeology YouTube, especially the legitimate fact-based stuff, is really primed to blow up right now. And I think all of us that already have our toes in there can really lead the charge. And I really want to make sure, one of my goals is to, I have some fun stories I want to tell. Look forward to my video. You will like my video on the Yasmina dog. It's just a great story. And then
write that down too.
And Michael McKinnon is the zooarchaeologist who published it. I'll try to get him on. And then I also, I'll have a bunch on Atlantis and stuff, but then and my own research. But then I like to highlight a lot of the good work that a lot of scholars are doing. So I try to have on a lot of scholars to really showcase what's going on in the field in the 21st century perspective of it. Yeah.
Good.
Cool.
And then the Ancient Apocalypse Watch thing is coming out too?
Yeah, so I'm producing some content around that. I actually did this Jennifer Raft thing beforehand anyway. We had recorded it like months ago. I'm so far behind in getting videos out. I have one video that's from like March. So I have so many videos to get out. It's hard. I need to figure out how to produce these faster.
Yeah, but it's a struggle.
It is. But so yeah, so we're gonna do one with John Hoops on pre-bunking, one with Curly afterwards. I know me and Milo have talked about doing some stuff, and I hope that we'll do some more stuff with different people. I think it's important to collaborate and develop, like I said, this ecosystem. I think that that's our biggest strength is going forward as an ecosystem. And I think if we do that, I think we'll all flourish. There's no reason for us to compete with each other. We are competing with the people that sell misinformation and pseudo-archaeology and fake facts. All of us that sell real information, we can merrily cohere together and boost each other. There's no reason to
just continue doing our thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. Thanks for coming on. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Great. Thank you.